animals with
being recorded.
I have been studying tide pools for many, many years. I actually went to UC Santa Cruz and got my degree in marine biology. And so I am now here, a part of the Sonoma County Regional Parks team, and I'm really excited over the next half an hour to be sharing some information about our local tide pool animals with you. Please make sure to have your computers on mute, and also please feel free if you do have any questions or anything like that, that you can direct those to the chat box. I believe that the box is located at the bottom of your screen. I'm working with a wonderful colleague of mine, Stephanie, and she will be monitoring the chat box today. And we'll stop about halfway through the presentation for some questions, and then I'll also take some questions at the end. So again, please feel free to direct any questions to the chat box. And if you want to direct those to everyone, then everyone that's joining us today can also be a part of those questions. So please make sure to be listening, because I will also be asking some questions of you. Here we go. Started. First animal, our bat sea star. Now, some of you might be looking at this animal thinking, well, I thought that was called starfish. And actually, that's the older name for these animals. Scientists have discovered that looking at this, it definitely does not look like a fish. And people were getting it confused, thinking that it was because it was called a starfish. So biologists have changed the name to sea star, and you can definitely see why. You'll notice here on this bat star that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arms. Now, you might want to call them arms, but they're very, very different than our arms. So actually, they are considered rays. This is a 5-rayed sea star. Look really closely at the sea star. You're also going to notice that it has a very spiny, rough skin. Maybe it looks a little bit like scales to you. This animal, as well as other animals that we'll see today, are part of the family echinoderms, which actually means spiny skin. Is what the other side of our bat sea star looks like, and it's very, very amazing what the animals have on their bodies that help them to survive in a very challenging but diverse habitat. Notice these right here, these are their tube feet. The tube feet, they have over 100 of tube feet, and these feet help them to attach onto the rocks, to hold on when it might be low tide, when the ocean water is far off of the beach. They might be attached onto the rocks for up to 5 hours, holding on with their very delicate tube feet. Also, our bat star and most sea stars have their mouth right in the middle here. And sea stars eat in a very, very interesting way. Because they don't have hands like we do, they can't actually put food into their mouth. Sometimes if little bits and particles are floating around, it might get stuck on their tube feet near the end of their ray. And then the tube feet can slowly direct that little bit of food into the sea star's mouth. But the really interesting way that sea stars eat that I think is amazing is that they actually take their stomach out of their body to eat. So imagine their stomach coming right out of their mouth here, okay, and actually eating the animals in their own shell. So think about that for one moment. Eaten in your own habitat. Look as well at the spiny skin or the scales that this bat star has. I was saying bat stars and other sea stars sometimes get stuck on the rocks during low tide. So this rough skin actually helps to protect them so they don't dry out in the sun. Also, it's a pretty good protection from predators like birds that would like to eat them. Now, that's not to say that a seagull is not going to take a sea star off and eat it, but it gives it a little bit more protection. So here we have a very common sea star that you'll see out at the ocean. Some places to go out at the ocean to find these animals. We've got 2 regional parks that are located in Bodega Bay. We have Doran Beach and we have Pinnacle Gulch Beach. And these are the animals, or these are the sea stars that I see a lot of when I go and visit those 2 beaches. when the regional parks reopens, I would highly recommend going to Pinnacle Gulch. It's one of my favorite places to go tide pooling, and it is a little bit of a walk down to the beach, but once you're down there, it's amazing, especially on a very low tide. So this is an ochre sea star, and also in the background here you'll see that it's next to its cousin, the purple sea urchin, that we'll talk about in a little while. This ochre star here, you'll notice, is an orange color. Sometimes you'll see them purple, and sometimes you might see them a lighter yellow color, but they always have sort of this white pattern on their back. These animals, sea stars and sea urchins and other animals in their family of echinoderms, sea cucumbers, and sand dollars, are all what we consider invertebrates. And vertebrate basically means it has no backbone. Okay, so like if you feel your wrist right now, you can feel the bones that are in your wrist. Okay, or you can reach behind you and feel your spine. Okay? We are vertebrates. So we have bones and blood and things like that in our bodies. Invertebrates are very different and actually do not have bones, do not have blood. So these animals actually pump ocean water through their bodies rather than blood. As I was saying on our last slide when we were looking at the mouth, they do use their stomachs to eat. Thinking about that, my first question to everybody is, what do you think sea stars eat? And in the box, and you can add that in there, or you can shout it out at home if you're watching with a family member. Oh, sea stars love to eat bivalves, which are basically mussels, clams, oysters, animals that have two shells. Okay? And what will happen is that our sea star will climb on top of a mussel shell, just like these mussels that you see here. They use their very powerful tube to pry open the mussel shell just a little bit, and then that's when they'll take their stomach out of their body, put it into the shell of the mussel, and then eat the mussel in its own shell. Depending on how big that mussel is, it could take a couple hours for a sea star to eat. Usually what they'll do is they'll wait for high tide when there's plenty of water for them, and then they'll slowly climb up into the mussel beds and find their snack there. Really neat, too, that you can see on the top of these mussel shells is you can see all these little barnacles. These are acorn barnacles, really common out in the tide pools. Also see a little bit down here of some seaweed or kelp. These mussels will make huge beds on the sides of rocks, and what they do is they can use their very strong threads that they create, called byssal threads, to actually hold on to one another and the rocks. So if you ever find a mussel shell that looks almost like it has little hairs coming off of it, that's going to be the byssal threads. This is one of my most favorite sea stars. And most likely, if you go out to a tide pool, you're not going to see this one in the really high zone, which is located up on the beach more. These animals here are called leather stars. And you can take a look at its skin and start to notice that it looks very, very different than our bat star and our ochre star. Usually these animals like to live in the lower tide areas, so those are the ones that you'd have to climb out onto the rocks. Definitely be very, very careful going out into the tide zone. A lot of times the rocks are going to be really slippery with mosses and algae or seaweeds, and so you definitely want to make sure you've got some good shoes on that won't slip on that. Good thing too, now that we're talking about being out in a tide pool zone, is that you definitely want to always face the ocean. Turning your back on the ocean is not a good idea because we have what's called sneaker waves, and those are bigger waves that come in, usually about every 6 or 7 waves. So always be facing the ocean to keep yourself safe. It's a little hard to see, but if you look right here on our sea star, there's a dot. And that dot there is actually the opening of a pump system that the sea stars have. So that's how they're going to be pumping that ocean water throughout their bodies. Sometimes they'll be sucking water in, kind of like a straw. And sometimes they even shoot water out like a little fountain. If you've ever seen sea stars shooting water off of its back, it's coming from this pump system. And the pump system is called a madreporite. And its tube feet to move. To folks, this is our knobby sea star, and I'm wondering, how do you think this sea star feels compared to the last sea star, the leather star? I was saying that our leather star likes to live in the lower tide zone. It's because they actually do not have that rough skin like most sea stars do. They have a very soft, squishy skin. And so they actually can't stay out on the rocks for too long like other sea stars can that have that rough protective skin. So that's why they usually will be found in the water. So that's why they're usually a little harder to find when you're out tide pooling. Now this knobby star here, you'll notice, has all of these little knobbies on it. Ask yourself how that might feel. They're rough and bumpy. These are called pedicelaria, and these pedicelaria have a very important job for this knobby star. Knobby stars and other sea stars don't really like things growing on them, like we saw those barnacles growing on the mussel shell. Sea stars don't like that. So they have these little pedicelaria, and they're little tiny pinchers that actually will pinch at something. It's trying to crawl over it, or maybe something settled on and is trying to grow like a barnacle would. Then those little pedicelaria come along and pinch that animal, and the animal will go away. These would be really good for protection also. Probably if I were a seagull, I wouldn't want to eat this one. Might be a little too hard for my mouth. Here are some different examples of some common sea stars that we have along our coastline. Some of the sea stars might have a very small range where they're found, maybe only here in Northern California. Our very first sea star that we started with, the bat star, actually can be found all up and down the California coast. When I went to school in Santa Cruz, I used to see the bat stars all the time at the tide pools there. I don't see them as much here in Sonoma County, but they're definitely there. I have the pleasure of working at the Environmental Discovery Center, which is at Spring Lake Regional Park in Santa Rosa, and we actually have our very own tide pool there for visitors to come and learn, and definitely have a lot of bat stars. We work with Bodega Marine Lab. The researchers there can go out and collect the animals for us. Please remember, everyone, all these animals are protected, so you can't go out and take them home yourself. We have the correct permits and things like that at the Discovery Center, as well as with Bodega Marine Lab, so they're able to, for research purposes, collect those animals, and then we're able to have them. Maybe now is a good time to take a quick break. Maybe I can check in with Stephanie and see if there's any common questions that have come up so far. Hey, Stephanie.
Kristina, at this time there are no questions, but to everyone here, this is the perfect opportunity if you have any burning questions about the awesome sea stars Kristina talked about. Now is the time to ask them.
Stephanie, well, I'll check back in with you at the end of the program and see if anyone has any questions. Thanks so much. So as I said, this is our last sea star, but we're still going to stay in the echinoderm family, and we are going to take a look now at the cousin of the star, which is this beautiful animal here. You might have seen this out tide pooling before, or maybe if you've ever had the chance to visit an aquarium like the Monterey Bay Aquarium or the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, you'll definitely recognize our purple sea urchin. Now, as I said, this is kind of a cousin of the sea star because they're in the same family, but you're noticing they look very, very different than our sea stars. Now, of course, they're going to have some of the same things that a sea star has. If you look really closely, you can kind of see these purplish strings. Now, those are their tube feet. Now, usually you'll only see their tube feet when they're in the water. When you take one out, usually their tube feet will get sucked back inside of the animal, and then all you will see are their purple spines. Are considered spines. I don't know if anyone joining us today has had the chance to touch a sea urchin before. It definitely looks very, very pokey. It looks like a pin cushion. But I definitely would recommend, if you've got a brave couple of fingers next time you're out tide pooling, definitely try to touch one of these animals. You might be really surprised on how it feels. Sea urchins are really, really amazing. As are sea stars, they have a really long lifespan. Some sea stars can live between 50 and 80 years. Hard to ask a sea star how old it is, but sometimes you can tell by the size. The giant sunflower star is an amazing creature, can get, I think what I could compare it to, could be the size of a beach ball around, if you could imagine a sea star being that big. That one there could probably live close to 80 years. Now, this purple urchin here probably would live about 30 years compared to this, our red sea urchin. Sea urchins can get much larger than our purple urchins, and you can notice here they have much, much, much longer spines. A little hard to see the tube feet on this one, but they're definitely there because they're holding the animal onto this rock. Now, red sea urchin, as I said, gets a lot larger than the purple urchins, and at their largest size, they could be over 60 years old. Question here about what do you think sea urchins would eat? So take a moment and think to yourselves. Again, you can send it to the chat box if you want everyone to see it, or if you want to, again, shout it out to your friends at home, you can do that too. Look at purple or this red spiky ball. What would an animal like this eat? Of their favorite food here in this picture, but they love to eat kelp or seaweed. There's three kinds of seaweeds that we have. We've got green algae, we've got brown algae, and we've got red algae. So you notice I used three different terms for the same thing: seaweed, algae, kelp, all the same thing. Again, being related to a sea star, does have a mouth on the bottom. Inside of its mouth, it does have teeth. It actually has 5 teeth. Sea stars do not have teeth. So that's one of the differences between the two echinoderms. What a sea urchin will do is they will move along the bottom or the rocks in a tide pool, and they will find some kelp, and they will climb on top of it, and then they will just munch away at it with their tiny little teeth. Found kelp on the beach, you might notice little bite marks off of the sides, and that's most likely from our sea urchins. So you know what sea urchins eat. Think for a moment on what do you think eats a sea urchin? A meaty little ball, all these big, huge spines. What kinds of animals might want to eat a sea urchin? Weddy is actually my most favorite animal. animal. It is the sea otter. Sea otters are so special, and we don't have any sea otters off of our coastline here in Northern California. They're mainly found in Central California. So again, going to UC Santa Cruz, I got to see a lot of sea otters. There's a really wonderful program for rehabilitation or helping sick otters get back to a healthy level where they can be released back into the wild. The program's at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and I had the pleasure when I was at UC Santa Cruz to actually help out with that program, and I actually got to go out in the field and find released otters and make notes on how they were doing, where we found them, and things like that. So it was really, really exciting. I got to get up close and personal with a lot of sea otters. So sea otters, what they'll do, everybody, is they will grab a sea urchin and they'll put it on their tummy, and then they'll use either a rock or a shell, and they'll bang into that sea urchin and they'll open it up and eat the inside of it. I don't know if anyone's ever gone to a sushi restaurant before, but we actually, humans, we eat sea urchins too. Last echinoderm that I have as part of our presentation today are sand dollars. You might be looking at this picture thinking that looks really different than a sand dollar that I've seen before. And that's because this sand dollar is actually alive. So usually sand dollars are going to be found on the bottom in the sand, usually in a pretty shallow area. And they'll kind of be standing sort of up on the ends. And kind of be sort of in kind of a shape, okay? And actually, they'll just filter the ocean water right through their bodies. That's how they eat. So they're called filter feeders. And you might notice, if you look really closely, that it is definitely a purple color, and it also is covered with tiny little hairs. So if you have the chance to feel a live sand dollar, it will feel very, very hairy. As I said, this is our sand dollar alive. Notice the pattern on its back looks just like a little star. Have a 5-part body system. So if you were able to cut into an echinoderm, it would have 5 equal parts. So each of those sea star rays is identical to the other ones on that animal. Same thing with this sand dollar. If you were able to cut into this, it would have 5 distinct areas. So this is going to be probably what you recognize more. Color here is up on the beach, and it's no longer alive. So this is the one that normally, if you're out shell collecting or just looking at animals in a tide pool, this is probably what you're going to see. Any of us who've collected shells over the years might have some sand dollars at home. I actually started to study marine biology when I was still in high school. I had the chance to go to a summer marine biology camp, and our graduation gift from that was very, very beautiful sand dollar. And so not only are sand dollars beautiful shells, but people can collect them, they can share them. I'm sure probably in the past native peoples have used them as money or in some sort of other trading. So I think what we're going to do is we are going to step away from our echinoderms and jump into some other really common animals that you'd see when you're out in a tide pool. This little one here, this is a turbine snail, and usually these turbine snails are going to be found high up on the beach, kind of in the rocky area where we call it the splash zone or the high tide zone. So when the tide is really high covering the beach, that's where these animals would live, or when the waves crash, where the waves kind of splash over, that would be our splash zone. These animals could also be a little bit deeper in the tide pools as well, but normally when I go out, especially to Pinnacle Gulch Regional Park, I usually will see them in like the high tide area. Now, turban snails don't have a really long lifespan, just a couple of years, but they can make their own shell. It will get bigger as the animal gets bigger. It's got a little muscular foot, so just like the snails in your garden, they have a little foot that they slime themselves along and move. They have the mucus that a garden snail would have that they leave behind, but they are able to glide rather easily over the rocks. They don't have eyes. Actually, funny, none of the animals that we've seen so far have eyes. They do have little antennae, so they are able to feel the world around them. Sea stars and urchins also use their tube feet to feel the world around them. Some people do say that sea stars have eyes. Usually they say they're on the tips of their rays, but they're not really true eyes at all. They can't see us or anything like that. They're really more like light spots that help the animal know top from bottom. The interesting thing that turban snails can do is they can actually go all the way inside of their shell, and they have a little tiny trap door on the bottom of their shell called an operculum, and they can actually close that up completely, and they can be completely safe inside of their shell. They'll have a little bit of water in there, and then they're protected from predators that might want to eat them. Snails are a very popular food out in a tide pool. Sea stars like to eat them, birds like to eat them, other snails like to eat them. So it's really, really important that they have this hard outside shell that gives them the protection they need. As I said, these animals actually have a really short lifespan, being compared to other animals like a sea star that could live 80 years. So what happens is that once this animal passes away, the shell is left behind on the beach or in the tide pool, and there's a little animal that loves to move into these shells. Who knows who likes to move into an empty snail shell? Well, you guessed it, is a hermit crab. My favorite tide pool animals. These little animals actually cannot make their own shells, so that's why they have to move into the empty shells that the turban snails leave behind. And it's not just turban snails, it's usually any snail shell that's left behind. I just noticed out in Bodega Bay, a lot of times it's going to be the turban snail shells, either the black turban snail, which is small, or the brown turban snail, which is a larger shell, kind of like on the turban snail we saw in the previous slide. Notice this is our first animal that's got eyes. It has its little claws here. Sometimes crabs will have one large claw and one slightly smaller claw. One of those claws is for protection and one of them is for eating. This little animal here, the reason that it has turned into a shell is because it cannot make its own shell like other crabs can. So it's just a soft-bodied animal. It would be the perfect food for just about anything in a tide pool area. So it really depends on the turban snails for their home. Sometimes you might see two hermit crabs fighting over one shell. What they have to do is they have to climb into that shell, try it on for size, and if it fits, that's their new home. They'll hold on to the shell on the inside with their back feet. And if you're looking to find where hermit crabs might be in a tide pool, they're also going to be in the higher tide zone areas because that's where they find their shells. Crabs as well, shore crabs, decorator crabs, kelp crabs that you can also see out in tide pools. So it's always a really good idea. This is what I always recommend if you want to see the most animals, is to pick a tide pool and either sit down next to it if you're able or stand close by. Remember, again, don't turn your back on the ocean. And take a few moments to look into it. A lot of times people go out tide pooling and just walk around really quickly and don't really notice what's there. But by stopping in a few moments, looking, you'd really be amazed at what you can find and what you can see. It is okay when you go out tide pooling to touch the animals. If the animals are in the water and you're very, very careful, you may pick them up. But please remember, everybody, that all of these animals are so special and so specialized to living where they live that you need to put them back in the same spot you found them. If you're out with your family and you find something really, really neat, call your family over to you so you don't step away from the tide pool. I'm all excited to share your animal with your family, because when you turn around, all the tide pools are going to look very much the same, and it's going to be hard to remember which one you got the animal from. Some animals are so specialized at living in their tide pool habitat that if they move even one tide pool over, they might not survive. So it's really important, again, if you are going to be holding these animals, to be very, very careful, also to put them back right where you found them. Another recommendation I would have is that if you want to pick up and hold a sea star, also a really good idea to find one that's in the water, because when you go to put that sea star back on the rocks, it's not going to be able to use its tube feet, because remember, it needs to have that ocean water moving through its body for its tube feet to work. So definitely put it back into the water. A lot of times what we do is we go out and we take one off of the rocks, we put it back right where we found it, but then its tube feet don't work and it eventually will fall off of that rock onto the sand, where again it might not survive. And it also makes it easier prey for those seagulls. This is another animal here that's actually still a part of the snail and slug family, and this is called a nudibranch. And this nudibranch is a lemon nudibranch. This is a very common animal that we see in our tide pools. Nudibranchs are a little challenging to find. They usually are going to be out in more of the deeper water. They can actually come out of the water for a very long time, because actually a nudibranch, the word itself means naked gills. And you'll notice right here on the back of this animal are gills. They kind of look like feathers coming off the end here. Usually when these animals come out of the water, they will pull their gills into their bodies, but they need to be in the water to breathe. So I recommend probably not picking up nudibranchs, because you notice they have the hard outside shell like our snail does. They do not make a shell. Kind of, again, like a slug in your garden. Near the front here, you can see that it's got some antenna. Again, that's going to be helping the animal to feel the world around it. Strong muscular foot on the bottom, just like our turban snail, that they can actually slowly glide on as they're moving about. So you can see our lemon nudibranch here is on this algae-covered rock, and they do like to eat algae. They also really love to eat sponges. Actually, sometimes they like to eat animals that have stinging tentacles. An example of an animal that has stinging tentacles would be a sea anemone. And what will happen with our nudibranch is it can actually eat that animal with its stinging tentacles and actually incorporate the stinging tentacles into its own body, so those stinging tentacles become part of the nudibranch. How amazing is that? Animals come in all kinds of beautiful colors. Another common one that I've seen is a light green nudibranch. I have the pleasure, after going to school at UC Santa Cruz, that I got to work in the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. And wow, the nudibranchs down there off of Ventura and Santa Barbara are so amazing, so brightly colored, bright purples and blues and reds and things like that. If you like to dive, I would highly recommend going to the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. It is one of the most amazing places I have ever been in my life. I've seen blue whales. I got to watch the migration of the Pacific gray whales. Thousands of pods of dolphins. It's just amazing. So a lot of diversity of life there, as well as our coast too. I've seen pods of dolphins right off of Pinnacle Gulch and Dome Beach when I've been out there tide pooling. Let's see. We're getting close to the end of our animals, everybody. This here you might recognize. This is a really common animal that we see out in the tide pools, the limpet. And we've got a couple different limpets here in this picture. These limpets also have a muscular foot on the bottom of the animal, and the shell covers it, so they're fully protected. Limpets can hold on really well, everyone, so probably not a good idea to try to get those off the rocks, but they're very easy to just walk up, use a real gentle two-finger touch, and then you can touch those animals on the rocks where they're living. Limpets are pretty amazing because they don't seem like they move a lot, but if you went out to a tide pool at night, they would definitely be moving around. They don't like anything growing around them, so no algae, no sponges, nothing like that. And so they go out every night and actually clean the area around where they were attached, making sure that there's nothing growing. Different kinds of limpets as well. I want to say we probably have over 25 different kinds of limpets, if not more, along our coastline. And of course that will vary depending on where you are along the California coast. Mainly when I go out to Bodega Bay, I see these limpets. Discovery Center, I think we've had a couple different kinds come through. As I said, we work with Bodega Marine Lab, and so when they go out diving, they find us some pretty interesting things that are really special just for us. So we do see a lot more diversity than you might see going out just to a tide pool on the coast. So on tide pools are a very challenging place to live. Not only do you need to worry about predators, not only do you need to worry about the tide and if it's low tide or high tide, but also half of your day is spent underneath the water, and half of your day could be spent sticking out on the rocks. These animals are very, very specialized to live in their home. Also, they have to deal with salinity changes in the saltiness of the water. If we have a really, really rainy year, then some of that salt is going to get diluted or not be as strong in certain tide pools. So that's another thing that these animals have to deal with on a daily or a weekly basis. So it's always changing. So that's one reason why it's really, really important to protect the habitat of these animals. How can we do that? How can we protect our tide pools and our oceans? Different ways that we can go about doing that. I decided to just pick 4 things to share today. I'm sure that you have many other ideas, maybe that your family does or that you do as an individual to help continue to protect our tide pools and our oceans. Some of the ones that kind of really strong with me and resonate with me. First one is only rain down a storm drain. Not quite sure where folks are tuning in from, but a lot of us live in neighborhoods. I live in a neighborhood here in Santa Rosa, and right outside my home in our streets, we have the entrance to the storm drains. Usually storm drains are going to be where the sidewalk and the street meet, and there's those holes there that lead down into the tubes that run underneath our streets, our storm drains. And so we try to let everyone know, especially folks that visit us at the Environmental Discovery Center, how important it is that only rain flows down into those storm drains. Because those storm drains actually flow right out into our creeks and the Russian River and the ocean. Anything that goes down those storm drains most likely will end up in our waterways. So in the past, there's been a crew of two people that went around in all of Sonoma County to clean out storm drains. You can just imagine that storm drains weren't really getting all that clean, and a lot of the things that went down storm drains, like motor oil from people's cars, trash, things like that, were ending up in creeks and waterways. And it's always really important, pick up after yourselves. If you drop something in the street, make sure to go and grab that. If you have a lawn or trees and you're going to be trimming those, make sure to clean up all of the yard waste and debris and put it in your green bin. That way, when it rains, all of that debris won't wash into a storm drain and clog it up, because then you're going to have a big flood out in the middle of the street. Second thing to help protect our tide pools and oceans is to try to reduce your use of plastics. There is a lot of plastic in our oceans, and it's getting into the animals' bodies. It's getting into our food sources with fish and things like that. And so any way that you can help reduce your use of plastics in your daily life is a really great thing to do. Using reusable water bottles rather than the plastic ones you can get at the grocery store. Packing a trash-free lunch for your kids when school resumes again. Or if you go on a picnic, you can bring, regular silverware rather than plastic silverware, cloth napkins. They make all kinds of things that you can store your food and sandwiches in that are non-plastic. One thing that my family and I try to do is not use plastic reusable containers to either pack food from restaurants or to take on picnics. We have either little stainless steel containers that we can use, or containers that are made of glass and things like that that we would just bring home and wash and then use again. Another one is to always pack out your trash. A lot of times going to tide pools, you're going to be going places that might be off the beaten path a little bit, away from trash cans and things like that. So always make sure that anything that you pack in, you also pack out. And the last one that I have, again, I'm sure there's many, many other things that we could add to this list. If you'd like to send some more things that you do in your life to the chat box so we can share that with others, that's great. My last one here is to try to use alternative energy sources. So that would be, rather than using fossil fuels and coal and oil, things like that, be using water and solar and geothermal energies in your life. I know that PG&E uses some types of alternative energy sources for our energy here in Sonoma County. We also have Sonoma Clean Power. Other areas around, I know, also have other programs and things like that. You could probably talk with your energy provider and find out what some of those other maybe alternative sources are in your area. See, I'm not sure, do we want to see if there's any other chat or questions that have come into the chat box?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. We have two about sea stars.
Okay.
So the first one is, how do sea stars use the bumps on their backs?
So those are the pedicellarias. So basically, they're like the little, I was saying they're like little pinchers. So those pinchers will get kind of activated when an animal gets close by, and then they're able to just kind of, if you've ever, almost like little scissors in a way is kind of what it feels like.
Awesome, thank you. The next one is, are any of these species of sea stars invasive?
Ooh, that's a great question. An invasive sea star. None of the ones that I showed in the presentation here are invasive. Maybe in other areas of the world there might be some invasive sea stars, but I haven't really heard of any On the flip side of that question, the sea stars over the last few years, I don't know if folks are aware, have actually kind of been struggling a little bit. They're going through, because the ocean waters are getting warmer, they're actually being more prone to bacteria that they were usually able to avoid and fight off. And they're getting a disease called wasting away disease, where it almost looks like they're just dissolving. It's interesting, I was saying to Stephanie a little bit earlier that I was just out at Pinnacle Gulch a few months ago, maybe February, and there were so many sea stars. And so I'm wondering if that wasting away disease is kind of subsiding a little bit or getting less, and the sea stars are able to come back. But coming back around to the question, I don't really honestly know of any invasive sea stars. But that'd be somebody's homework, and you could find out.
So we have a few more questions. Another one is, why is it called a sand dollar?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I know in the past why it's called a sand dollar. It was because people were using them kind of, as I was saying, like sort of like with trading and things like that. I know that there's another one that's related to a sand dollar that's a sea biscuit that almost looks like a biscuit. So I know if I used an educated guess, I might say because it kind of reminds people of a dollar.
Thank you. And last one, unless anybody else has questions out there, is why do limpets clean only at night?
That's a good question, too. Probably because of the safety of the evening. As I said, they don't have eyes, so they can't see, but they can sense light and dark. And since predators are going to be a little less active at night, then they have the opportunity to be able to move. Because when they move, they actually pick up their shell a little bit, so they're really vulnerable to animals being able to get at them and eat them. And so during the evening time, it's just a little bit quieter out there. And as I said, it's a little harder for animals to see and things like that, especially the ones that don't have eyes. And so they just have that ability to move around in the evening time just more safely.
Awesome. So we had another question, a few more questions coming in. Why turbine snails make their own shells?
Most crabs and snails and things like that make their own shell. They use the calcium carbonate, which is part of the ocean water, to actually create those shells. They have a part in their bodies that they can combine with that calcium carbonate to create a shell. And so that's why the turbine snails, they need it for protection. So a lot of these things that these animals have to survive in their habitat, we call adaptations. And so a snail shell, the hard crab shell, the tube feet of a sea star, all of those things are allowing that animal to live in its habitat to the best of its ability. And so the snail needs that shell to survive, because if it was just a little soft body cruising around out there, it would get eaten immediately.
We also had a request come in to see if we could see a picture of a sea star with wasting away disease.
Ooh, that's great, everybody. I actually do not have a picture of that, but maybe if I continue to do these programs, I can definitely make myself a note, and I can include that in another presentation. Because, of course, everybody, this isn't all the animals that you can find in a tide pool. As I said, there's so much diversity in life out there that we could be doing presentations, 3 or 4 of them, just on tide pool animals alone. You could probably get more information on the Bodega Marine Lab website, or another good resource would be Monterey Bay Aquarium. You might be able to find some pictures there of the sea stars with the wasting away disease. It reminds me, if somebody poured like acid on something, that's kind of what it looks like.
So Christine, we had another question come in, and it's about sand dollars. And the question is, why do sand dollars have the flower shape on them? Pattern.
You know, well, as I was saying, since they're echinoderms, they have a 5-part body system. So it's interesting that they actually do have that pattern, because that would be the 5 parts that you would see if you were able to cut the animal open. But it's not really an adaptation that they have. It's where the water gets filtered into their bodies. So it might actually just be one of those wonderful things, magical things of nature, that's just what it looks like.
That's all I am seeing in the chat.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this program and you enjoy going to regional parks, please support us. Sonoma County Parks Foundation is our nonprofit that helps support our educational and interpretive programs. So if this is something you've enjoyed and you'd like to see more of it, you can visit Sonoma County Parks Foundation.org and learn more there. I also wanted to let people know that there are going to be some more of these coming up in the near future. We are going to be having on Tuesday, April 21st at 3 o'clock with Sandy Funky. We'll be an iNaturalist and the City Nature Challenge. And then on April 28th at 3 p.m. with our fantastic colleague, Stephanie. She will be doing a presentation on wildflowers of Sonoma County. So I hope that you'll be able to join one of those or both of those. Please check out on the Sonoma County Parks website for more information on all of the presentations we'll be having over the next few months and into the future. Thanks much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.